All right. Hi. Thank you all for coming at this very early morning on a Monday. Thankfully, I know that all of you went to bed early last night, and that's how you were able to get in so early this morning. I'm Cory Doctorow, and I'm a fellow of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and I write science fiction novels. And I'm a journalist and edit a website called Boing Boing. And here with me today is Bart Gellman.
I am a journalist and book author. I'm based now at the Century Foundation. I've been writing lately about Edward Snowden and his documents for the Washington Post.
And Bart is too modest to say it, but he has 2 Pulitzer Prizes, which is worth noting. So, for those of you who don't know, Bart flew to Russia and interviewed Edward Snowden, which was fairly momentous, I think, for any journalist career, but especially given your relationship with whistleblowers and state secrecy. Could you tell us about how that came to pass and what the actual operation ran like? How did that work?
I had been in contact with Ed Snowden by various encrypted text forms for dozens and dozens of hours since early mid-2013, and had been one of the 3 journalists to receive archives of NSA documents from him, and I was eager to finally sit down in person. It took him quite a while before he was ready to receive a visitor in Russia. He has a complicated life there. So yeah, I mean, it took a lot of preparation. I mean, he needed convincing that it was the time to go, and then I had to figure out how to get in and out and sort of get notes and audio and photographs back without giving them to either of the governments and without losing them. So it was tricky.
I'd be really interested, we talked about this a little bit last night, I'd be really interested in anything you're willing to say about what that process looked like. And not just out of a kind of morbid curiosity, but in the sense that we now live in this very digital world. We all transmit lots of digital material back and forth. Some of it's very sensitive. Even if it's not state secrets, it's still things we wouldn't want to see on the front page of the newspaper, which of course was Snowden's test inside the agency. How can you do this? What would it be like if this were on the front page of the newspaper? What are the lengths that you go to in your operational security if you want to do something as simple as file some copy?
Right. Well, in order to work with the Washington Post on these stories, I asked that they create a secure workflow and space to do that in. So obviously, once we're ready to publish and it can go out on the open internet, but we're not going to store things while we're still considering what to do and while we're still working up our packages. We're not going to store things on a network anywhere. There's no sense saying that we're going to carefully consider the merits of the story and the public interest in what we publish and then leave it sitting around where any competent person can come in and steal it. So we have what you'd expect. We have sort of a well-locked room with computers that are left off when no one's in there and full disk encrypted, and they never touch a network, and we communicate by encrypted channels, and when it seems important, we communicate over anonymous channels as well. Certainly, everything I've ever done electronically with Snowden has been both anonymous and encrypted. And I knew how to do that stuff. I've been on the paranoid side for some years as a national security reporter. But people laughed at me, actually. I mean, I was not... there are lots of people who do this sort of work who had not been doing that. I didn't want my notes to be available to anyone, frankly, including my editors. After Time magazine handed over notes against the will of the reporter in the Scooter Libby case. So I've been doing this for a while.
Now, in the post-Snowden world, there seems to be, if not peak surveillance, at least peak indifference to surveillance. It seems like we've reached the moment at which the number of people who go, I've got nothing to hide, I've got nothing to fear, is only going to decline from here. It's not like they've disappeared or anything, but we've gone from near 100% to back in September, the Pew study found that 88%, 89% of Americans had taken some affirmative step to protect their privacy online, which is a shocking number. I mean, it's a number that just knocked me for six when I first heard it. Now, the interesting thing about it when you go into the Pew study is that nothing that anyone did in that 87, 88% would have done anything to protect their privacy.
But I was going to say, of the 88%, all 88% were ineffectual.
Were useless. But in part, I think that must be because the tools are not designed with that in mind. In fact, I think most of the tools are designed to make it very hard for you to do anything to protect your privacy. And in part, I think that's because if nobody cares about privacy, no firm is going to spend any engineering dollars making their tools better at protecting your privacy. It's just sort of, it's a waste of money. You can't put now more private on the box and sell more copies. But part of it, I think, is a certain degree of complexity in crypto. And now in the post-Snowden world, there's at least 3 different foundations I'm working with that are putting money and hours into improving the UI and the experience of crypto in a way that makes it easier. And one of the conditions I have for working with these groups is we have to abolish the phrase "so easy your mom can use it," which is not only horrifically sexist and unfair to mothers, but totally unreflective of the real problems with security. So we use "so easy that your boss can use it." And I guess having gone through a process of bootstrapping a big conservative institution with lots of IT needs that have no nexus at all with national security and have every nexus with making sure that a newspaper is printed and left warm on the doorsteps of people across Washington every morning, do you think that there is a world in which we can make the security tools so good and so easy and so transparent that normal human beings, that 87% who tried to block third-party cookies ineffectively in their browser in the Pew study, are they going to be able to do this?
I think we're a long way off from that. It is surely possible that with all the user interface brains out there, we could get easier to use encryption tools. But anyone in the business will tell you that it's not just having the technology, it's not just having the ability to encrypt something, message by message. It's a frame of mind, and it's a workflow, and it's a discipline that is just alien to most people, and that is the opposite of the openness and collaborative nature of the internet. So let's look on the anonymity side. Let's say you use Tor and you create a webmail account, name of Donald Duck, and every time you go on Donald Duck 100 times in a row, you remember to start your Tor browser first, and the 101st time you don't. And that's a pretty good record, only 1% error rate, and now it's as if you never used it, because you've now identified your IP address with that account irrevocably. Now this is if you have good reason to worry about someone tracking you individually. You have a better chance at stopping routine, easy mass surveillance. But that's only for content. That's what encryption does for you. It does not do anything for your metadata. And metadata these days is as revealing, sometimes more so. I mean, my own feeling is, in general, I would rather have someone listen in on 30 days of my phone calls than have access to all my metadata. You can learn much more about me from the locations and who I talk to and when and for how long and that sort of thing than you can from what I'm willing to speak on the telephone.
Yeah, in the United Kingdom where I live, before the Snowden story broke, our Home Secretary proposed legislation that would require ISPs to retain all their metadata, much like the Canadian legislation proposed under Vic Teves, require ISPs to retain all the metadata, and then would give policemen, but also government agencies and their appointed representatives, including civilians, access to that metadata. And and they kept insisting that it was just metadata and there was nothing compromising in it. And so I wrote a little one-act play for The Guardian in which Alan Turing is introduced to Winston Churchill by his line manager, Home Secretary Theresa May, and she says, Mr. Prime Minister, we have bad news. We've been laboring every hour that God sends here in Bletchley Park to break the Nazi ciphers, and we've had no luck. All my boffins can do is tell me something about their metadata. And Churchill says, is that a Greek word? And she says, something like it. And she says, yes, all we know, nothing of strategic value, all we can determine is where they are when they're speaking, who is speaking, what they're speaking about, where they go afterwards, how often they speak, and all the participants in it, and who they know. But nothing of any strategic value, at which point Churchill sends her out of the room. I know security experts who say that metadata doesn't exist, that the idea that you can draw a clean line between content and metadata in a message is something that falls afoul of some of the fundamentals of information theory and some of the things Claude Shannon brought down. That there are bits of useful information in metadata, which is specifically why we capture it, that we would call content if we were being intellectually honest. Do you think metadata is real?
Do I think there's a real distinction? Not so much. As I said, I think you learn substantively much more about me from the meta than you do from the actual content in many cases. Look, I mean, this is one of the great gifts of Edward Snowden, is the bringing of transparency to what surveillance can do. And the more concrete you make it, and this is what addresses your first remark about sort of peak indifference to surveillance and how interest in it and concern about it has been growing, the more transparent you make it and the more concrete and granular you make it, the more people who don't think they care about surveillance start caring. So just a tiny anecdote. There's a guy in my office at the Century Foundation who didn't think he cares about people tracking his location. I mean, he left locations on by default when he tweeted. He tweets a lot, so I downloaded a little tool from the net and scraped 3 months of his timestamped locations. And I uploaded that to Google Maps, private map to protect him. And then I did about an hour or two of research on what the locations were. So I brought him in and turned on the screen and said, okay, so we know where you work right here. Here's where you live. Here's where your kid goes to school. Here's your in-laws. Boy, you were up late that night. Here's 3 places you go to all the time. I'm not even asking what they are. And he kind of flipped out and went on to Twitter and deleted all his locations. And the thing is, you can do that. You don't have to broadcast them, but Twitter still knows, and all the people Twitter sells it to know, and certainly the government knows. And location, sort of what I was able to get about him with this little tool is a tiny fraction of 1% of the data he's leaving around, and that almost all of us do, unless we're willing to live off the grid. I'm a journalist. I can't live off the grid.
Now, there's been so much that came out of the Snowden leaks. I mean, just every day. And as someone who tries to just sort of summarize it all and put it into context every time, it's almost a full-time job to just keep up with and contextualize all the information. You follow the stories very closely. What surprised you? Was it the fact that they have a horrible advice columnist at the NSA? What is it that kind of really shocked you about how this stuff works?
Well, honestly, the breadth, the scope, the scale of the mass surveillance, which they would prefer to call bulk collection. But President Obama recently defined bulk collection in a footnote to his presidential decision brief on January 17th, I think, or 14th. Bulk collection is the collection of data, signals intelligence data, without the use of discriminants, which is the same thing as saying indiscriminate. And the idea that, I mean, I'm pretty sure, I looked it up. So the idea that they have the capacity and the policy of collecting comprehensively, that they are seeking sort of comprehensive situational awareness of a kind that they've never had before in history through all our gravest national security threats, was shocking to me. The idea that they are creating a database of a very substantial fraction of all the locations of all mobile devices all the time around the world was shocking. The fact that they had that they have a sort of a known program that is known to the Silicon Valley companies called Prism, in which they can come through the front door and take data from those companies. And at the same time, overseas, they were breaking into the private cable data links between their data centers so that when Google synchronizes its servers from Ireland to Hong Kong, so that it can distribute loads around the world and perform all the magic that Google performs, when they synchronize that data and therefore put all of it across, the NSA can sit in the middle and break into that. That kind of stuff did surprise me quite a bit.
That's interesting. I was away for the weekend with some friends when the Prism story broke, and one of those friends is a very, very senior cryptographer at Google and security expert there. And as the Prism story broke, he was like, I've never heard of that. And then we heard all these explanations for how it was. We got these very carefully worded denials from Apple, from Google, and the other companies involved. And you got all these people who tried to play, sort of high-tech criminology with it, where it's like, well, they said that they're not doing this. Does that mean they're doing this? And it was interesting to hear him say what it couldn't be. It was like, oh, no, that data center is run by a Czech guy. They never would have given him security clearance, so it can't be that, because this guy would have to be a part of it, and he could never get NSA security clearance, just sort of as a practical matter. But as Prism, the picture of Prism became sharper, one of the things that we learned is that it seemed not very efficient and not as deep as it sounded at first blush. And then we learned about the undersea taps and about the other fiber optic taps. And I've been operating on the theory ever since that the reason for Prism was to give them a plausible explanation for knowing the things that they learned from the fiber taps. And as a way of just sort of not alerting these companies to the fact that they had gone in the back door.
Well, in the Prism briefing itself, it advises people who are going to use that system. There's two ways of getting the data you're looking for. There's Prism, which collects the data at rest, and then there is just a generic term, upstream, meaning grabbing the stuff on the wires as it crosses. And it says specifically, you should do both. There are various, there's going to be a considerable amount of overlap, but there are technical challenges to catching the data on the fly at the speed of light, although they're pretty good at it. And then there are things that don't turn up if you only get the stuff at rest on the servers. And I don't know whether it's a cover. Look, Prism is collecting a lot of data, but it is a relatively targeted tool. That is to say, there are 45,000 different selectors or search terms they're using, which is, a pretty large number. You're not going to have that many terrorists, for example. But it's not millions or billions of communications that are coming in that way. The infrastructure taps are a massively more high-volume thing. There was one program that I wrote about called Muscular, in which they were getting 100,000 Yahoo email address books per day from this tap. The numbers, there's an expression in newsrooms, danger reporter doing math. But you add a bunch of zeros to that and you get up to big numbers pretty fast.
I think that most of us who were paying attention when the Prism story broke assumed that upstream meant the phone company tabs. And in 2005, Mark Klein walked into EFF's offices, the Electronic Frontier Foundation's offices, then on Shotwell Street in San Francisco, the big folder full of documents, and he said, I was an AT&T engineer, and my bosses ordered me to build a secret room at our Folsom Street switching center and to install a beam splitter in our fiber optic trunk and to effectively run off a copy of the internet for the NSA. And EFF has been suing since then about this. It was on the front page of every major newspaper in the world, but it didn't stay there. And one of the questions that I've asked is, in the years since Klein, we've had Binney, we've had Drake, we've had Klein, we had WikiLeaks, none of those stories seem to have the staying power that Snowden's story had. And it's not, all the easy explanations don't seem to map to it, because Klein, for example, was not someone who made the story about himself, so it's not people found him distasteful or anything. Klein is the world's least offensive human being. He's just a telecoms engineer who couldn't believe that he was violating the First and the Fourth, or the Fourth Amendment in this way. And it's not because the story was hard to grasp. It's really easy to grasp. And it's not because the government didn't play the sinister mustache-twirling villain on cue, because they really did with the Klein story. But something about this story has kept it alive in a way that none of the other stories have stayed alive. Is that peak indifference to surveillance? Has it arrived at its historical moment? Is there something about Snowden? Is it the exotic adventure of chasing jets to Hong Kong and Russia? Like, what got us to this story about Snowden?
Well, Snowden paid very careful attention and thought hard about what had happened to, I haven't talked about Klein, but certainly about to Tom Drake and Bill Binney, and their, he thought they were enormously courageous. I mean, he could speak for himself, but he admired what they did and realized that it didn't have the kind of lasting impact they were hoping for. And his solution to that was documents. I mean, that's the one-word answer, is that not just one document, but a very large number of documents. And look, any big institution is good at derailing, deflecting, denying, changing the subject, moving on from accusations about its conduct. And the institutions that you're criticizing, when you're criticizing the U.S. government, have big megaphones and have opportunities to use them every day. And if you don't have definitive proof, if you don't have something that they can't just wish away, then they're going to change the subject on you pretty fast. And frankly, if Snowden had asked me whether 8 or 9 months later this would still be a dominant story, whether South by would have changed its whole agenda along with everybody else to talk about his revelations, I'd have said, I can't think of a story that's had that kind of impact. I think if that's your aspiration, you're going to be disappointed. But he's got to have exceeded any plausible expectation for impact. And part of it is because he didn't release them all at once. He doesn't think they should all be released. But he needed the reporters, he thought, to have the full pictures so they would have the right context for the stories they did write about. He's not controlling, as some people imagine, the drip out of stories now. It just takes lots of time to figure out which documents are important and what they mean. But he has not tried to control what we do or don't write about or when. But look, take the Google example. If you followed this story at all, you probably remember the cartoon on yellow paper of, it says sort of the Google Cloud. So here it says, Google Cloud, here's the open internet, there's a little thing in the middle, it says SSL, encryption added and removed here, and a smiley face. So I run across this thing and I say, aha, light bulb, that must be a story. SSL added and removed here, smiley face. Something important about this, but there's a reference in there to a paper called Google Cloud Exploitation, and sadly, that was not part of the drop. In fact, actually, the documents he gave are in electronic form, and they have live links in them, which I thought would be a really bad idea to click. But I have I have been tempted from time to time to say, oh yeah, I want that one. Call up the NSA Public Affairs office and say, my subscription to SSO News seems to have run out. Can you? How do I renew? But the point is, it took more than a month of reporting by me and a really, really smart technologist, Ashkan Sultani, to figure out what this was. We had 6 different theories about what it means, added and removed, encryption here. None of them were right, and it took reporting outside the documents to figure it out.
So of all the stuff that kind of caught my eye in the dump so far, it wasn't the flaky advice columnists at the NSA, it was Bull Run and Edgehill. And I still think that this is the least appreciated story about the Snowden leaks to date. And those are the programs, Bull Run is its American name, Edgehill is its British name, by which $250 million every year are spent on undermining security in the technologies that we all use. Some of it is spent bribing companies or inveigling them in some way, into weakening their products. There's this widespread accusation that RSA took $10 million to weaken one of its mainstream products. Some of it is spent sabotaging security standards. Obviously, there's this NIST standard, this National Institute for Standards and Technology, for generating random numbers that has now been deprecated, and they've reopened it. Apparently, it was something of an open secret at the time. There were a lot of people who were in that committee who said, there's this guy who's obviously an NSA stooge who's in charge of this committee, who's demanded that we all use this elliptical curve business that we all think is weak, and they've made it part of the standard for government use, and therefore it's ending up in all of our products because we all hope to sell those products to the government, so it's got to have this in it. And the thing that shocked me about that is that, you know, we live in this world that's now made of computers, right? I was in an airport lounge a couple of months ago, and I was using the only plug in the lounge, and as sometimes happens, someone comes along and says, you done with that? Can I use it? And I said, no, man, I was here first. And he said, it's just I got to recharge my leg. And he rolled up his pants leg, right? And he was robot from the knee down. And I was like, yeah, you can have the plug. We have computers in our bodies. We put our bodies into computers. If you take the computers out of this building, it will be uninhabitable very quickly. If you leave them out of this building for any length of time, it will never be habitable again because it has to respirate through a computer-mediated system that keeps it from going mildewy and so on. And we use computers every moment of every day. A 747 is a flying Sun Solaris workstation in a fancy aluminum case connected to a bunch of badly secured SCADA controllers. And the idea that an agency tasked with the nation's security would make computers deliberately harder to secure just blew me away. And it seems so depraved in its indifference to the security of the nation. And we talked about this before. Is there any way to resolve the tension between your job being to secure the nation and your job being to break through other nations' security? If you find vulnerabilities in systems that are used here and in Iran, is your moral duty as the National Security Agency to patch them so nobody's messing with them here, or to make sure nobody patches them so you can exploit them in Iran?
Right. This is the kind of dual nature of the NSA. It's a very unusual agency in that its less famous branch is called Information Assurance, which is supposed to defend and ensure the integrity and authenticity of U.S. government and to some extent sort of U.S. national information flows. It's supposed to defend us against spying by others, and it's supposed to break everybody else's secrets and steal them. That's the Signals Intelligence Directorate. And you could kind of imagine what happens when the two of those come in conflict. If your job is to steal secrets from everybody else and protect your own secrets, and they come into conflict, your instinct is to go after the bad guys as you see it. Look, I mean, this is an agency that grew up out of precursors in World War II, and it was obviously really important to the war to break the enemy's codes. And the thing about that is Japan and Germany used unique codes that they created that only they used, no one else used, and so it's a really easy call. Do we try to break that or not? And they did break that. Now, the world, almost all world communications go over global networks using common encryption standards. And just to make it clear for those of you who aren't techies, the role of random numbers is absolutely vital. I mean, encryption is based on the existence of math problems that are really easy to go one way and really, really hard to do in reverse. And that depends on the generation of truly random numbers, really, really big numbers that get multiplied. And if you can undermine the random number generator, if you can make it less random, if you can say that instead of having, it's sort of 10 to the 37th possible numbers in this generator, there are only 10 to the 10th, then it's really easy to break the encryption. And that's what the NSA was doing. The NSA was trying to persuade or trick or buy companies to make their encryption more breakable. I mean, their ideal world, they would create an encryption standard that only they could break and no one else in the world could possibly break. That would let them square the circle. That would let them be both information assurance and signals intelligence gatherers. But there are very few security experts who believe that that's possible.
Yeah, Bruce Schneier, he says that anyone can design a security system that's so strong he himself can't think of a way of breaking it. All that means is you made a security system that works against people who are dumber than you. And unless you're the smartest person in the world, that means that it's not as secure as it could be. And that's his call for open inspection of security. It's not a new idea that if you have a scientific prospect, you may be blind to its failings, and so you should expose it to other people. It's the difference between alchemy and science, right? It's not what you study, it's whether or not you tell people what you discovered. And, alchemy did make some valid discoveries, but most of them were lost when people found out for themselves the hard way that drinking mercury was a bad idea. And so this is not a loony idea that we should publish, but it seems like the NSA may have fallen prey to the idea that they are the smartest people in the world, and that if nobody inside the NSA can think of a way of breaking something, it must be unbreakable except by the one means that they've reserved to themselves to break it.
Yeah, well, there is a theoretical way in which they could have unique access to the flaw they introduced in this standard at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. I won't get into the details, but it's highly unlikely that you can do that even once, and certainly doing it on a regular basis is not possible. And so, I mean, the security world is based on the idea that security by obscurity, where people won't know your secret tricks and therefore will never be able to break your code, is a bad idea, and that your methods of securing something should be open. I say the algorithms, the methods of calculation should be open and freely examinable by anybody. But in fact, that's not really the world we live in, even with, say, the advanced encryption standard, which is used very widely. You can inspect the code on that, and lots of people have and banged up against it. But the problem is that for lots of what we do, it's hard-coded into a chip. So on your iPhone or on your Windows computer, there's a chip that has AES built into it. Or there's a trusted platform module, a piece of hardware that is a crucial part of the security. And you can inspect that. I mean, if you have an electron microscope and infinite resources, maybe you can, maybe you can't. But sort of basic security researchers can't go in. And if you undermine that, if you undermine things in hardware, then the standard is gone, and it's very, very hard to tell if anyone's doing that.
I agree. I think that one of the things we've learned from another security realm, which is the digital rights management realm, is that there are people with electron tunneling microscopes who, for fun, do things like look at chips. And that one of the structural challenges around security and disclosure is that every now and again we run up against laws that prohibit disclosure. So for example, it's against the law to tell someone about a flaw in a system if it will help break digital rights management. As a consequence, digital rights management systems tend to be long live reservoirs of critical vulnerabilities through which their owners can be attacked either by spies or by bad guys. We talked about you not liking the term whistleblowing, but when is it right, whether or not the law permits it, to come forward with information that you were not supposed to come forward with?
Well, I have this conversation with people in government and in secret worlds all the time, and they start off usually from the proposition that it's never right, that you swore an oath, that you promised, that the national security depends on it, and you therefore must never tell these secrets. Now, one thing that I don't like about the term whistleblower is that it's way too narrow. It's usually interpreted by the institutions against whom you want to blow the whistle as meaning only if you can identify specific unlawful behavior or genuine fraud or insane amounts of waste. Only that counts as whistleblowing, and of course it has to be done through internal channels. Now, if you're Edward Snowden, who did, by the way, go to he most lately said 10, I think that's about the right number, of supervisors, let alone having informal conversations with lots of colleagues inside the NSA saying, would this pass the front page test, which is a fairly bold thing to do when you're in the middle of gathering documents and speaking to 3 different reporters, trying to drop a dime on the world's greatest surveillance agency. Nevertheless, I mean, he talked to these people, but what you can't do if you're Ed Snowden is go to your bosses, to the leaders of the agency and say, for God's sake, man, look at yourself. I mean, everything you're doing is outrageous. I mean, that's not blowing the whistle. That's just telling them that they're drawing the wrong lines. And so I think the illegality test is too narrow. Although, right now, the federal courts, who are newly enabled to discuss the question, to hear the question about one of the programs that Snowden revealed, are split. And it may end up being that it's found to be unconstitutional. So that means it's a pretty high standard. I actually think the point is, are you shedding light on a crucial decision that a society ought to make for itself? If the idea is genuine, that the government works for us and not the other way around, and information is power, right now we are living inside a one-way mirror. The government knows, and by the way, big corporations know, more and more about us. We know less and less about what they're doing. And there's a huge disparity of power in there. So if there are big questions, do we think it's an okay idea, even if it's good for security, for the government to keep records of every phone call we make? Do we think it's a good idea to try to bust the encryption standard so they can listen on people that they want to listen to and expose our medical and financial and other crucially private records to potential harm? If it's one of those questions, a big policy question, and stuff is being done behind our backs that might actually shock us if we knew about it, then there's pretty good reason to put it out there. And so, if I thought there was any chance at all of you guys backing me up on this, I'd say forget whistleblower. I mean, it should be, lantern holder, light bringer. I mean, that's where I'd go.
One of the things that happens when we talk about Snowden, and Snowden does this himself in his comments to the EU, he talks about this. We conflate 2 different arguments when we talk about NSA surveillance or mass surveillance. We say, first of all, it's wrong, and second of all, it doesn't work. Which raises this question: if it's wrong, why do we care about whether it works? I think that it doesn't work. And Snowden made this point in his testimony to the EU. They've had lots of time to tell us about all the bad guys they've caught by spying on everyone, and they haven't managed to produce anyone. So extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. Let's have some. Just trust me doesn't cut it here. And I call it the greater manure pile theory of greater manure pile theory of crime fighting. That if there is a big enough pile of poo somewhere underneath it, you must have a pony. But even if it does work, even if it's true that if you pile the comms deep and high enough, all the bad guys magically shake out of it, should we still be doing it?
Well, all right. First of all, I don't speak for Snowden, and fortunately you're going to get to hear him speak for himself. My understanding of his position is that he is very much against mass bulk surveillance, but that he believes that targeted surveillance, going after a particular subject of interest to an intelligence agency, is very much valid. So the question of whether it works or not. This reminds me of some of the elements of the torture debate that we were having during the Bush administration, right? So people who didn't like what Bush was doing said torture's immoral and illegal, and it's stupid because it doesn't work. I mean, you get a lot of bad leads, and people will say anything under duress, and so on. Now, that's often true. Certainly you can get someone to say anything. That has been the purpose of torture in many totalitarian societies, not to actually get information, but to force declarations that are false. Nevertheless, I mean, if you want to say something is immoral, illegal, unethical, you have to be willing to say that that's true even if it does work. That's not the society we want to be. And, in certain questions, what's the combination to this safe? Torture self-evidently is going to work. I mean, so the question is whether you're willing to say, no, we don't do that regardless. Likewise with surveillance, I tend to think that there is some value to some of these great big gigantic programs that they have in place, that they are going to learn things they wouldn't otherwise learn, that are useful, and that might even be useful to things that many of us think are good ideas to do. And then the question is, what kind of a price in terms of our own privacy are we willing to pay for that? That's where I would like to see the national and international conversation taking place.
Before we go to the Q&A, there's one more question or one more subject I'd like us to talk about, and that's the relationship of a new generation of people to privacy. Dana Boyd, who's here at this conference speaking, has a new book out called It's Complicated, and she's one of the preeminent sociologists of how young people use the internet. She's done field work with young people for more than a decade. And she talks about the problem of the narrative of digital natives, that when we call kids digital natives, we assume that everything they do on purpose because they have some quasi-mystical understanding of the internet, and they know that privacy is over, and that's why they disclose things. And Dana says, there's a much more plausible hypothesis for this, which is that kids are making mistakes. Right, as between the theory that somehow in this generation we have evolved a mystical understanding of the internet and kids are making mistakes is the most likely of the two. I found it surprisingly easy to convey surveillance and its risks to my kid. I've got a 6-year-old, and she's figured out that when I go abroad and give talks that I talk about stuff. So last week she said, "What are you going to talk about?" And I told her about Snowden, and I said, there's this guy who was a spy. And he found out that his bosses were spying on everything, and they were getting everything. They were getting everyone's emails and texts. And she sends emails to her grandparents in Canada. I live in the UK, because drop-down keyboards are really good for kids who are learning to spell. And she was immediately outraged. She got it right away. She said, they're listening in on this? They're reading it? How can they read so many messages? And I said, well, they're just looking for ones with bad words. And she said, you mean like swear words? I said, no, like bank robbery. And she said, but what if I sent them a message saying, next time I come to Canada, I want to play bank robbers? So she got false positives like that. And it's not because I think my kid is the smartest kid in the world. I think kids know what it is to be surveilled. And you've got a 6-year-old too. Do you think that we have a generation that doesn't care about surveillance, or a generation that's figuring out surveillance?
Oh, I'm completely persuaded. By the way, we need encryption that even a 6-year-old could use. That's the new standard. I'm completely persuaded by Dana Boyd's argument that a lot of the sort of self-violations of privacy that younger people make are by accident or without understanding fully the consequences. But it goes further than that, and other parts of her work and the work of others makes it really clear that it's just not true that these kids today, they don't care about privacy. Any parent who's been locked out of Facebook settings, by their teenager, understands that privacy is relational. You might not mind telling your friends or a certain group of your friends things that I might not have talked about when I was their age, but you sure don't want these other people to know. There are things that you'll tell your spouse you won't tell your kids, things you'll tell your friend that you won't tell your boss, all the way down the line. You want control in a particular situation of what you disclose and to whom and when. And the other part of the fallacy is this idea, well, if you want to be more private, just don't put it on the internet. Well, what Facebook knows about you, I don't know, I can't tell you exactly by percentage, but I would bet 5% of it is what you tell Facebook. 5% of it is what you post. Enormous amounts of stuff come from surveillance that you're not aware of, or from other people, and they may not be aware of what they're doing. For example, I declined to give Facebook my phone number or the email address that I really use, but I don't know, probably 100 of my friends who have my cell phone in their address book have clicked OK, the default, and synchronized their address book with Facebook. So Facebook knows all my numbers. Facebook knows all my email addresses. I didn't tell them that. The invasions of privacy are not things that you control yourself.
So we got some questions from the tubes. Terry Sequeira wants to know, why would we trust any encryption tools?
Oh, I'd like to hear what you say about that.
There's a good book that was written by transcribing a long conversation between Jake Applebaum and Julian Assange and Jeremy Zimmerman and a few other people at the Ecuadorian embassy. And Assange makes this point. He says the universe wants us to have secrets. Now, I'm skeptical of the idea of ascribing intentionality to abstractions, but in this case, there's something to it. The maths of crypto are pretty solid. You know, we have it in our power to create ciphers that can scramble information so thoroughly that if all of the hydrogen atoms in the universe were made into computers that did nothing but labor until the universe's heat death to break them, they would run out of universe before you ran out of possibilities. Now that's an amazing fundamental thing that's different from anything we've been to before. If we can inspect the code, if the math itself is subjected to the kind of scientific rigor that we use to make sure airplanes don't fall out of the sky, that is to say it's public and disclosed and peer-reviewed, I think that there is a good basis for trusting it.
Yeah, well, my version of that would be, well, first of all, Snowden, who had the highest clearances and had very strong motives to understand the answer on this, says, quote unquote, encryption works. Let's say if you do it right, which nobody does, then they can't break the math problem. Certainly not now. And I've reported on a story in the documents that suggests that the NSA, for example, is no further ahead on quantum computing than the best civilian and university researchers. And the fact is, encryption works to slow down or block mass surveillance. It's just hard to do it on a mass automated basis because it's too hard to break so much encryption on the fly. If they're targeting you, they don't do it. I mean, Genghis Khan didn't try to knock down the Great Wall of China. He bribed the guards, put up ladders. I mean, you don't do the hard part. Today we would call that a side channel attack. And what Snowden says is the problem is a failure of endpoint security. So they're not going to try to, break the mighty cipher that I'm using. They're going to, put a pinhole camera in my wall and watch me type my password.
So speaking of advanced capabilities, Matthew Wilson wants to know, why haven't we written about IARPA's nanotech programs yet?
Well, anything I haven't written about, either I don't know or can't prove, or I'm, stand by. I'm working on it. I mean, there's a lot of material to go through, and although the documents are clearly authentic and authenticatable, and I've authenticated them, that doesn't mean that everything that they say in them is fully accurate. So, I mean, I have found cases in which the author of a document misstated something, and so I'm doing a lot of reporting around each thing. But as it happens, I don't know anything about a nanotech program.
BG Austin says, are people checking in on Foursquare and Facebook? They're checking in willingly. Is that also an NSA plot?
I don't know how, what do they put in our water to make us want to check it? No, I mean, look, there are all kinds of social forces and added value for lots of people in connecting themselves up with these amazing services. Now, I happen to be a much less enthusiastic user of this kind of stuff than many people I know, but people find value in it. I mean, and the NSA finds value in it. It's not a cause and effect thing. I mean, there is vastly more information in the world about us than there ever has been in the history of the planet. So think about the Prism program, which is the first story I wrote, in which the NSA is getting information from 9 big, mostly Silicon Valley companies. When they started getting the information this way, Facebook was still limited to college campuses. Twitter it barely existed. Gmail was in beta, and they now, among them, have more information by themselves than has ever existed on planet Earth. So the NSA takes advantage of a target-rich environment. Doesn't mean that they caused it.
Yeah, I would say that the problem isn't that they caused it, nor do they have to. The problem is that there's a conflict of interest or a moral hazard if these things do indeed pose a risk to the people who use them. And I think privacy is one of those things that's very hard to get right because the action and the consequence are separated by so much time and space. You make a disclosure and 15 years later it comes back and bites you in the ass. That's a hard thing to learn from. And so if indeed these are problematic, and the state and its agencies might want to improve the information, health, and security of the nation by helping us through public education the same way we do about other things that have distant causes and effects like eating cheesecake or smoking cigarettes or in these other things where we enjoy them in moderation, and if you do some of it, it's probably okay, but if you do enough of it over a long enough time, something bad's going to happen to you. If at the same time the most powerful agencies in the government rely on you never taking any affirmative steps to protect your privacy, because their entire theory of crime fighting revolves around the idea that no one takes affirmative steps to protect their privacy, that suggests that we're not going to get an optimal outcome. It's a bit like the censorware filters in our schools that trap every click that every kid in the school makes. And so you have these teachers who, for good reasons, I think, stand at the front of the classroom and warn kids about privacy on the internet. And they say, when you put information on the internet, it lives there forever. You must think very carefully about your privacy and not disclose things that you are important to you or might harm you later. And then at the same time, because they rely on spying on every click that every kid makes to make sure they're not looking at hoo-haws and nay-nays, they have to, at the same time, prohibit the kids from taking any affirmative steps to protect their privacy. The message is your privacy is vital and you must never disclose it, and it's precious and infinitely valuable, but when I'm spying on you, you must treat your privacy as though it's worthless and never do anything to protect it. If we really cared about kids' privacy, schools would be a place where you learn to jailbreak every piece of DRM and circumvent every firewall and use proxies and use crypto and so on. So Bart, there's a question for you here from Christopher Reed. What kind of scrutiny and harassment have you and Greenwald come under by the government since you released the docs?
I'll speak for myself. I have not been harassed. I've had some interesting conversations with government representatives, various degrees of temperature in them. I do talk to the government about every story before I run it. I want to validate it. I want to confirm it. If they have information that they want to give me to demonstrate the falsity of something that I think I know, I want to hear it. If they want to give me context, or if they want to give me specific reasons why they think I would be doing damage that I'm not aware of by publishing, I want to hear that. Those conversations vary from very calm and constructive to very loud voices to we're not even going to talk to you about this, and don't forget you're exposing yourself to 18 U.S.C. 798 and 18 U.S.C. 793, the Espionage Act, so you better think hard. I have traveled twice out of the country since I started writing these stories. I've not been stopped at the borders. As far as surveillance, I assume that I am more interesting than I used to be to a number of people. Google has notified me that it believes a state-sponsored attacker is trying to compromise my computer or my account, which is nice of them to do, and nobody else.
Google, not the state-sponsored agency, just to be clear.
Google. No other company does that I know of, but the problem is it says, click on here to protect yourself, and it says, choose good passwords and floss every day and turn on two-factor authentication, all the things you already should be doing, and they won't tell you where the threat is coming from. I assume at this stage that people trying to hack into my computer are more likely to be foreign intelligence services than my own.
Do you ever think maybe there's a macro that someone at NSA PR has where they just type they just type Gellman and hit tab and it just says we do not comment on national security matters. Please, be aware that you are coming under risk of the Espionage Act.
No, actually, that's much closer to the UK.
Yeah, the GCHQ.
That's much closer to the GCHQ. I was told that there was a one of the standard Five Eyes get-togethers, meaning U.S., UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia. They're the closest sort of friends and collaborators in the world of signals intelligence. They had a get-together, and GCHQ representative said, our policy is we simply will not comment on secret intelligence, full stop. And all the people there from the NSA started clapping, because that's what they wish their policy was. As say, the operators, the people actually doing the programs, I mean, and I understand it. I mean, try to put yourself in their shoes just for a minute. They simply can't believe that day after day there are new disclosures of their secrets, and the government's talking to reporters about them. Why hasn't someone put a stop to this? I mean, you've heard Keith Alexander come out and say exactly that. But by and large, the balance of forces has been that they recognize there's a value to these conversations.
Tim Harford, the skeptical economist who has a BBC radio show about stats, often interrogates dodgy government statistics, and they always ask for government comment, and often as not, they get a bland memo, and they have an actor come in and read the memo, and then they ask the memo questions, and the actor says things, I don't know, it just says things like, I don't know, I'm a memo. And they ask all the questions they would have asked of the government spokesman and have the actor say, no, I'm just a memo, I'm still just a memo. Hugo Lefebvre says, in contextualizing the Snowden leaks, do you ever worry about revealing flaws in the national security system?
Well, I mean, if you mean, do I worry about doing harm? Do I worry about putting lives at risk? Of course I do. There are things in the documents that I don't think should be published, and that I will not publish, and there are things in the documents that Snowden doesn't think should be published as a matter of principle. He doesn't lay out those in detail. But I'm looking for the sort of big public policy questions. I'm not looking to tell you things that would be really cool to learn, but there's things in the documents that I think everyone, very large numbers of people would have three reactions. Wow, that's cool, I didn't know they could do that. I'm glad they're doing that, considering where and how they're doing it. And too bad they can't do it anymore, because you just blew it. I'm not going to reveal the secret thought-reading earrings that they put on the mistress of the Martian emperor so they can find out about his plans to invade the Earth, right? I mean, what I'm interested in are the questions that affect democratic accountability.
Just for clarity, that's a hypothetical.
Oops. Yeah, sorry.
Danielle Gibbons says, what was the most difficult part of interviewing Snowden?
None of it. It was fascinating. It was a reporting experience that will be quite memorable to me. He is a very smart guy on a lot of different levels, and a very nimble mind, and it's very interesting to talk to him. Now, I mean, there are lots of boundaries he draws. There are things he won't talk about with me, and I, as a reporter, will look for side channel attacks and little detours or tangents that might make it possible for him to address those things. For example, he's not going to tell me exactly how he did what he did. He doesn't want to talk about that. It's something I'm certainly very curious about, and if I stray anywhere near there, he'll tell me to back off.
So we've got these documents, and they continue to come out, and they will continue to come out presumably for some time, and there will be hearings, and there will be fact findings, and something will or won't happen to Snowden. What do you hope for? What outcome do you think we might get out of this?
No one ever believes me when I say this, but I'm actually not looking for a particular outcome. What I stand for is transparency. What I stand for is enabling people truly to make their own decisions. What transparency has been doing and will continue to do on the surveillance question is it creates, for the first time ever in the digital age, a market for privacy. You simply couldn't buy it at any price. It was nobody's business model to help you communicate and not spy on you and not mine your data. There's the Silicon Valley likes to say that if you're not paying for the service, you're not the customer, you're the product. Well, the fact is, if you are paying for the service, you're still the product. I mean, I'm carrying around, much but not all of the time, this little spy device, and I'm paying Verizon Wireless a couple $1,000 over the life of the contract, and they're still mining my data, and I can't do anything about it. So there are now companies that are coming into existence that want to sell you privacy. I'm willing to pay for it. There are lawsuits that not only hypothetically, but in fact, in our experience, could not have been brought until these disclosures, right? When EFF and the ACLU have tried to challenge these surveillance programs in court, some of the cases have been thrown out for lack of standing. That is to say, you can't prove that you or your client were actually affected by it just because you think there's a lot of surveillance going on. Well, now you can. Now you can. We're customers of Verizon Business Services, so we know that our data has been mined. And regulations can change, and politicians can change laws and come under pressure from their constituents to change laws. So I'm for the transparency that allows those forces to work.
My feeling, we sometimes get bogged down in a debate about whether the internet makes us more free or less free. And we've seen the internet do both of those things. And so for me, the important question to ask has always been and continues to be, what can we do with the internet so that it makes us more free? And as you say, a market for privacy, better cryptographic tools, an end to state-sponsored sabotage of network security, I think all work to make us more free. And you know, at South by Southwest Interactive, I've been coming now for 15 years, although it's been 10 years since I was last here. And I've seen companies come and go that have had various missions that revolved around making us more free. And I hope that we're seeing the start of a trend that 10 years from now, sitting in this ballroom will be people keynoting and talking about technologies that not only accounted for, but will account for new ways for people to work together without the intervention of third parties who have no business being involved in their stuff. That's our time. Did you have anything you wanted to end with, Bart? I want to hear what Ed says.
Well, I'll just piggyback on that last comment. Well, there are people in this room and at this conference who have devoted themselves to building those tools, or who have taken very considerable risks, legally and otherwise, to protect the privacy of their customers, who have said no to surveillance and put themselves right at the edge of the door to jail. And it's going to take courage as well as ingenuity to change the way this stuff works.
Well, thank you all very much for coming, and thank you to South by Southwest. And very shortly, I think we'll hear from Edward Snowden and his friends from the American Civil Liberties Union, who do amazing work, and an organization I hope you'll support. Thank you.